You are listening to an Art Media podcast.
So, Jonathan, what's your number this week?
It's in percentages, 99.9%. That's 1 in 1,000 Iranian drones launched from Iran. Only one of them made it to Israeli borders and luckily not causing any injuries or casualties. And we don't know if that was the work of Jewish space lasers, but I guess we'll find out in the next couple of months.
Well, mine is 66.70. That's $66.70. And that's the price of crude oil per barrel. This is similar to what it was June 12th, the day before Israel attacked Iran. And we've paid a lot of attention to oil prices. There's been a lot of speculation. In the end, this is where it nets out. So both of our numbers are very war-related, not surprising. But Who wins here?
Well, I'm back in Israel. Had the pleasure of having a few of the latest sirens here in the shelter. To me, this 0.01% making it here is a very kind of, close to heart number.
Welcome to What's Your Number, the newest podcast from ARC Media, where we focus on Israel's economy through a global lens. I'm Michal Evram.
Yonatan Adiri.
Jonathan, it is 8:30 a.m. here in Palo Alto.
6:30 p.m. in ceasefire Israel.
I can imagine how good it feels to be home and to say that you're home. So welcome back.
It is. It's great to be home. All credit to my incredible wife and 4 kids for, managing through. I was here only for 2 out of the 10 days, the last ones. Pretty significant hit here, 300 yards from our home. Pretty scary outcomes. But, I think people were very much unified and knowing that we're suffering this, we're in the shelters, but it's for a good cause that was pretty much in consensus. That's very, very intimately felt. And, much like I was sitting at the shelter when I was, I think, 9 years old when Saddam Hussein fired his 45 missiles. Our kids, are dealing with a similar dynamic. It's not nice. It's not, fun. But it gives them an understanding that this is all for a purpose.
Well, and speaking of that resilience, the war obviously is still, ceasefire or not, very much in the backdrop. But today we're going to focus on the AI arms race, actually, another kind of battle, and what Israel's role is in this. We're going to talk to Yoav Shoham, who is an AI expert, longtime professor at Stanford University's Computer Science Department. He is now co-founder and co-CEO of AI 21 Labs. And this is one of Israel's most prominent AI companies today.
Yoav is also, it's an incredible privilege to hear from him. He has a perspective. He's built, quite a number of companies, been to Stanford as a professor in the golden days of the 90s, inspired some of the most famous, digital entrepreneurs of Silicon Valley. It's a great opportunity to speak to him to understand how he thinks about AI in general and stick around. It's going to be interesting.
First, as usual, we're going to take a look at some of the week's pressing news, aka our big shorts, including some key numbers that should be on your radar, like the Windex. Stay with us. On to our big shorts. We're going to kick things off with this week's What's Your Number Index, or Windex. This is our very own index of Israeli-based and or Israeli-founded companies. And Jonathan, how is this week's Windex looking?
So I should say last week, that is June 16th through the 22nd, both NASDAQ and S&P were on the rise in the green. Windex was in the green as well, but I would say underperforming by 0.5% or so. So growing by 1.07, whereas S&P and NASDAQ grew by 1.67 and 1.6, respectively. This was a good week for the markets, Windex included. An interesting move in the green this week on the Windex. It's a combination of 2 autonomous car companies from Israel, always great to see that we're still, critical in the infrastructure of that growing industry. Mobileye, the pioneer of autonomous car sensing, until recently the biggest acquisition out of Israel by Intel.
And by the way, co-founder of Mobileye, also co-founder of AI21. So nice connection there.
We're going to hear some interesting feedback from Yoav Shoham on Amnon Shashua, that founder, really a legendary Israeli entrepreneur. Mobileye has been growing at 16.3% last week, grew 16.3%. Innoviz, a smaller company, an upstart, IPO'd early on its journey, on its path, that makes a solid-state LiDAR. There's a big competition on how do cars actually see. Both companies rose, with Innoviz growing 45%, 45.74%, on the news that Volkswagen's robotaxi, going to be launched next year, incorporates both companies' technologies. This is a big win for both. So let's see.
Not surprising to see these numbers, honestly. I mean, there's so much going on the robotaxi side. Waymo announcing that they're going to be launching more markets. I think they just launched Atlanta. They're about to in DC and other locations. They're all over the place in Palo Alto, by the way. And then, of course, Elon Musk, with his robotaxi launch. So a lot going on in that space. I would not be surprised if we keep seeing these kind of positive numbers.
I agree. And I think we'll kind of look at the subset on the Windex in a few weeks and kind of try to see companies related to that field and how they're doing, very much like we did the defense tech space. On the negative, on the red, SolarEdge, which we've been following, kind of going back more or less to its kind of original figures. Pretty hard time in the solar energy space. And so to me, another indicator to watch is the primary victory today, what seems to be a primary victory for a Marxist BDS supporter, New York mayor candidate, that is Zoran Mamdani. After doubling down just yesterday on his will to arrest Prime Minister Netanyahu upon his next visit to New York City, I think a win for Mamdani casts a really dark cloud on Israelis doing business in New York. I mean, the whole rationale behind the Windex is to reflect, this tie between Israeli founders and growth technologies in New York. This would have a major negative impact on Israeli-related economic activity in New York. This is a major one.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the bright spot here is everybody speculating that real estate prices in Florida are going to experience a boom now. But, very good point to bring up, and I think worth a deeper dive in a future episode on, more broadly speaking, on BDS and sort of what traction we're seeing and what are some actual real potential impacts.
Yeah, overall, I think, we saw Michael Eisenberg this morning, one of the titans of Israeli tech industry, publishing his thoughts and perspective on the Mamdani candidacy. And it's the Florida piece, but it's also the Israel and the Tel Aviv piece.
Well, let's move on to some other things we're seeing happening both in Israel and elsewhere. For starters, 7-year-old digital payment company Melio was acquired by SMB giant XERO. This is following a reported negotiation for acquisition by Bill.com, an American company, for $1.95 billion cash and share deal, which fell apart in 2023. Yonatan, what do you make of this?
I think first, we're not even halfway through the year. Israel's at $43 billion of acquisitions, IPOs, and overall, kind of realized economic value of its tech industry. That's almost 8% of the GDP. These are unprecedented numbers. Melio's acquisition was negotiated from the shelter. So the founders, from the Mamad. The founders there's been a nice conversation online talking about how the last couple of weeks they had to navigate, when I was in that seat, there's a lot of T's to cross, I's to dot when it comes to these acquisition agreements. When we acquired an American competitor, it was the last few days were always a nightmare. I can't even imagine what it was like for the founders with sirens and with the kids and with hits in the general Tel Aviv area. To negotiate and finalize the deal with a New Zealand-based acquirer. So kudos to them for the grit and the persistence. A 7-year-old company reaching, this type of valuation is important. I think that the third part is how Israeli fintech is not just on the top layer, right? The application layer. This is kind of like the plumbing. So Melio is in that space. I would value the total sort of enterprise value at this point outside of Melio at, I would say, $12 to $15 billion of market cap in that space. That's great to see Israeli companies, as opposed to where we are in AI. This is similar to where we are in cyber, right? We're at the very bottom of the stack, which is really good because wherever the industry goes, these companies have the grit and the wherewithal to sustain this type of challenge. I think we're in a great position there on the app stack, but also at the sewage, at the plumbing. And big kudos to the team at Melio for negotiating and finalizing an acquisition agreement. Really under fire.
All right, let's get to our long play. This is our deep dive into one significant issue affecting the Israeli economy. And as we said earlier, today's long play is a conversation with Yoav Shoham, longtime entrepreneur in the AI space and professor at Stanford University. Yoav has started and sold several AI companies well before ChatGPT and this whole current explosion of Gen AI. And his newish company, AI21, is one of the most prominent AI companies in Israel today. So we're going to hear more about his company. We're also going to talk to Yoav about how he thinks Israel is positioned in the AI arms race. Yoav, welcome to What's Your Number? First question for you is just, what's your number? Did you bring a number to share with us?
It's got to be 4.
4, okay. Meaning?
Well, it's, more than 3 and less than 5. But start with, I have 4 kids, the most important thing in my life. And then I was associated with 4 higher education institutions, starting with the Technion in Israel, ending with Stanford in California. And I've had 4 companies. So it seems like a destiny.
So, Yoav, you recently came back from Paris, and I think you were stuck abroad like Jonathan was as well, and many other Israelis. But I saw that you wrote about this dinner hosted by Emmanuel Macron, where there was a discussion on AI strategy. And you wrote that his mobilizing of the ecosystem to support French AI should be studied by every national leader. So as we're talking about what Israel's strategy is currently, which you play a role in, and what it could or should be, tell us a little bit about just what you meant with those words. What can be gleaned from what France is doing?
France has emerged as probably the preeminent AI power in Europe, eclipsing the UK, which is also substantial. And I think Macron really was pivotal in this. And what he did is a combination of things, of drawing attention, coercing the very substantial French industry to support the French AI, both in terms of booking orders and investing. So Mistral is a poster child, but there are other companies who are kind of drawing a lot of attention in France, usually in Paris and the environment. There are a few substantial cloud companies there also. And so, and it would not have happened without he's organizing high-profile conferences. This meeting was a very kind of intimate meeting convened by him and Maurice Levy from Publicis was, I think, the driving force behind it. He's also the driving force behind Vivatech, which has become Europe's largest tech conference. And I think that's I'm not aware of any other leader who has done as much for their own industry, AI. There's also a general European ethos behind this effort, not just France, but certainly it's France and then Europe.
What do you think about the term AI arms race overall, just to begin with?
It's perhaps a little militaristic, but I think it captures reality. Everybody's rushing to build capacity. Capacity can be in raw compute or talent or whatever, anywhere up the stack. I think some of it is FOMO, to be honest. But nonetheless, I think every country owes it to itself to develop that muscle. If I take Israel as an example, by the way, I actually wear another hat. I chair the scientific committee of the Israeli AI project, National AI project, so I have some visibility into it. Israel, as an example, will never compete in the quantity of compute that US has or China has, or for that matter, Saudi or the UAE, but it nonetheless needs to have its own AI infrastructure. And having means multiple things. It can mean actually having it physically on within its geographical borders, or at least having access to control over that capacity elsewhere.
Yeah, just one quick question on that, Yoav. Do you think it is plausible that at some point we will see cloud infrastructure being closed for certain countries because of, kind of a split, be it China, US, and allies? And in that context, do you think at some point in the foreseeable future, we're going to somehow ameliorate the energy kind of, better AI means exponentially more energy, or sort of how do we fix that as part of this arms race?
So first of all, I think people don't realize that AI doesn't start and end with just very expensive high energy compute of LLMs. In fact, we're sort of reaching a plateau of just throwing more raw power at the models. And so I don't know that energy, which right now consumes the systems consume a ridiculous amount of energy. That'll continue, but I don't think it's going to grow unboundedly. It seems to me that currently the energy supply in different parts of the world is correlated with the amount of compute that's reasonable for those areas. So, for example, UAE has a ton of compute and as much energy as you'd like. I think, so for example, Europe, I think, is aided by it having invested in nuclear, and that's going to help us, certainly in France. Israel also seems to have enough energy to support the amount of compute it will build in the near future. Right now, we're talking about not many thousands of GPUs, and even if we grow to tens of thousands of GPUs, I think that's within the capacity of the grid to supply.
Give us your take on what is Israel's AI strategy currently, and let's talk about where it could be going.
Israel, unfortunately, is distracted by all kind of stuff, internal, external, and this as well as I do. And so Israel being Israel, it had two AI plans. And there was one, and the second one was adopted. This was headed by Dr. Orna Berry, whom you may know. And it was adopted as a government decision, and it was budgeted. Not at the level they require. I think they requested 5 billion shekels, and I think the first tranche was 500 million, and then the second tranche of another 500 million. So 1 billion shekel is not nothing, but it is very little. It happens under the auspices of an interesting forum called TELEN, which is it's hosted in the Ministry of Education, but the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Defense and the Innovation Authority, and everybody's involved there, and it's doing good stuff, but more needs to happen. And there have been various noises from the Prime Minister's office about efforts to catalyze a more substantial effort in this area. And we'll see what happens.
Well, so if you've got obviously US and China, the big kind of superpowers here in the AI space. So talk a little bit more about the role that some of the smaller countries can play here. I mean, if you extrapolate, yes, there's a focus elsewhere right now, but in the near future, what role do you think Israel can play and should play? What are the competitive advantages that the country has when it comes to AI?
So while it's true that if we are trying to play the popular chatbot game, that's a very expensive game. By the way, it's not there's no mystery here of what needs to happen. It's just a lot of work and a lot of money and a lot of compute. And so that's a game that few will play. But nonetheless, there will be multiple core technology providers from other places for a number of reasons. One is independence, and the other is needs that aren't general purpose chatbot needs. So, if you go to France, you have Mistral and a couple of others. You go to Canada, you have Cohere. In Israel, you have AI21 as a core technology provider, initially building LLMs, and our LLMs we're somewhat underbranded and working to fix that, but we're actually doing very well because of the unique architecture we have. I think the biggest game now is moving beyond LLMs to AI systems, because in the enterprise, there's a sharp drop from pilot to deployment. And there are many studies that show it. Like one AWS study showed that 6% of the projects see it to deployment. And the main reason is there are two reasons. They're kind of vanilla reasons. One is new technology, you need to understand the use case, privacy, security, and that, compliance. But the two kind of things that loom large. One is accuracy, reliability. And like I said, if you're garbage 5% of the time, you're dead in the water. And the other is cost. The LLMs are costly to deploy. They're hard to predict, and they're hard to predict the cost of, and they can be expensive. And so CIOs and now CAIOs are looking very carefully about this. And the world is moving to AI systems. We just announced Maestro, which is really the first such orchestration system that's industrial grade, and that's and I haven't forgotten your question. That's no longer an issue of just throwing money at things. It's much more an issue of brain versus brawn. This is very much a blue ocean, and with no particular advantage to people, to companies or countries that have a lot of money and compute.
Is it maybe a replay or a rerun of previous Israeli dynamics where B2C was too far, and so we ended up with B2B and enterprise? Are you seeing the same? Is it also the type of talent that we have that drives us in that direction, or it's more of a strategic choice that AI21 took, but also maybe other companies where you see the blue ocean?
I think it is a strategic choice we made because, we actually had a very successful consumer product called WordTune, a writing application, and it's just amazingly successful.
It is amazing, yeah.
But we didn't see it taking us to be where we want to be, and in fact, from the very start, we wanted to be a B2B company, but that this wasn't a market, and now there is a market. But Israel has become, as you, Jonathan, know, and in fact, Michal, you know too, has become actually quite good at consumer application. And there are a bunch of application builders who are using AI. So I don't think it's indicative of the Israeli market in general.
Last episode, we discussed the acquisition of Base 44 by Wix. Not so much in the context of the degree of AI that was deployed, but more from the context of this North Star of potentially like few people, billion-dollar companies, right? Like very few, a small group of people with a killer app. What's your thought process on that over the next 7 years? Are we going to see sort of smaller teams relying on unique architecture, to your point, Maestro orchestration, and then generating outsized value? Or at some point at scale, when you deploy a B2B in the billions, you're going to need the classic infrastructure of human beings still to build that company?
I think realistically, you're going to need, boots on the ground. We started with a small number of people, but to scale and accelerate, you need people. And certainly for go-to-market and, customer support and all of that, but even for product development, at some point you need. there's probably economy to be had. Certain aspects can be covered or augmented with technology. And so I think people will look carefully before they hire, big armies. But the $1 billion company, I think, is a catchy slogan, but probably not realistic.
Speaking of having people, of boots on the ground, I think you've always had co-founders in your companies. At least that's my recollection. I know you've talked about your co-founders. I've heard you say, I think with Amnon Shashua, he's got twice your brain. Like, how do you characterize your co-founder selection here?
No, so actually Amnon is maybe an exception here, but my rule of thumb is somebody who's half my age and twice my brains.
That's what it was. That's what it was. Okay.
And I also said that it gets easier and easier to find them. So I have two co-founders, Ori Goshen, who very much fits the bill, and Amnon, who's just twice my brains, but not half my age.
Yoav, last question for you. I know you've spent a lot of time over the years thinking about some of the deeper questions that AI brings up for humanity. And there's this recent MIT study that's been making, at least in the media, in the headlines, been making a lot of waves that seems to suggest that the use of ChatGPT among students is eroding critical thinking skills. What do you think? Where do we net out here? Does AI overall help the way we think, or does it erode it?
There's no question that technology in general changes us. And if I look at my kids, I'm sure it's true for you. Look at the kids, they're growing up in a way, in an environment that's very different from ours. And it's actually hard for us to understand how they're thinking, and even before AI. So we bemoan their addiction to screens, their short attention span, the fact that they don't do long read, and it's all true. Does that mean they're worse thinkers? I'm not sure. They're different. Does that mean that we're not going to have the scientific, breakthroughs that call for somebody just banging their head against a problem for days on end and having the stamina and the perseverance? I don't know the answer to that. People make the analogy to GPS. We don't navigate as well as we did before. It's true, but I don't think I'm a worse spatial orienter because of that. I just have a tool and it changes how. So I think it's early to say what ChatGPT does to us. It's early to say, but I'm not cavalier about it, because it does do so much, these AI systems, that it can make us lazy. And I think we'll need to develop skills to control for that. And maybe at the end of the day, it'll be very hard to function productively without this very smart assistant. But like with human assistants, we'll become extremely good at managing the assistants, coaching them, checking them. So it'll be different. But it's a good question. And I still don't know what MIT stands for.
Well, we miss you here in Palo Alto, where Stanford University is located, but excited for what's to come with AI 21 and appreciate you speaking with us.
Thank you, Yoav.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see you both again.
Well, we began our show with the numbers of the week, and we're going to end with the words of the week as usual. China can now continue to purchase oil from Iran. Hopefully, they will be purchasing plenty from the U.S. also. And that, as I think most of us know, is President Trump's recent social media post. By the way, I was going to go with these two countries don't know what the fuck they're doing, but I decided to go for this more tame one. Are you surprised by this, Jonathan?
Yeah, I actually think it reveals something that sort of was on the table throughout the war that got me thinking. And you put it forward with your number in the beginning, right? The price of oil. We saw Russia and China standing down. We didn't see pressure on Israel. We didn't see pressure on the US, neither from China nor from Russia. There might have been a deal, right? So I think this is indicative of sort of maybe President Trump saying, you've been good, right? And so now I can kind of lift the veil on what everybody knew was going on, which China was procuring oil from Iran. There's nothing new there. But in lifting that veil, President Trump actually sort of did a favor, to the Chinese in a way, kind of legitimizing it, although it's against the sanction regime that the US and the Security Council have imposed on Iran. So I think overall what I take from that is, kind of in hindsight, 12 days of international support, or at least no stopping of what was a crucial play for Israel's future.
All right, that is it for today's show. Thank you for tuning in to ARC Media's What's Your Number? We hope you found it interesting. And if you did, please be sure to like, subscribe, rate, review, you know the drill. But most importantly, please share it with others who you think will find it interesting. If you want to make suggestions or share your feedback, please reach out to us at whatsyournumber@arcmedia.org.
What's Your Number is produced by Ilan Ben-Attar and edited by Michal Evram. Sound and video editing is by Martin Huergo. Our theme music is by Midnight Generation. I'm Yonatan Adiri.
And I'm Michal Evram. See you back here next week.
See you next week.
This podcast offers general business and economic information and is not a comprehensive summary for investment decisions. It does not recommend or solicit any investment strategy or security.